Ladies and gentlemen, this is Art Edwards Appears Large, podcast 3. I have a guest today, very special guest today. Mr. Brian David Blush is on the podcast today. He's an old friend. He is a guitar player for the Refreshments, guitar player for Murphy's Outlaw, guitar player for Luck and Trouble, and many other bands. He's a solo artist, released his own solo records. He writes his own songs. He's been at this game longer than you can shake a stick at. So I want to say hello to Mr. Brian David Blush.
Hello, Art. Very good to see you, bud. As always, I'm always very happy to hear your voice and see your shining face.
Thank you very much. I'm glad there's one person out there. But what I want to start, there's a lot of, there's like a few things I want to touch on, but like the most important thing with Brian is I want everybody to understand where he's kind of the origin story, where Brian's from and what brought him from where he's from up to Tempe, Arizona. And talk about some of those formative things that people might want to know about you, Brian. So go right ahead and touch on some of those.
Okay. Well, I guess the story starts on the east side of Detroit, Michigan, where I was born. A city called Warren, Michigan is where I was born. And lived there, through my grade school years. And when my folks kind of started having all their ducks in a row, we moved to a suburb of Detroit called Rochester. And ended up going to the same high school that Madonna went to. So I think I'm preordained to have landed in this industry or whatever it is. But no, I started playing guitar when I was it was the summer of, 5th grade. And my best friend was in 6th grade. And I remember very clearly listening to the Motley Crue record, Too Fast for Love. And we somehow back then, there wasn't MTV even yet. But somehow we saw these bootlegged like videos of these guys doing this crazy rock stuff. And so we decided we were going to learn how to play guitar, and we took lessons together for, I don't know, a couple of years. And then as time progressed and I got into high school, I started kicking around with some musician type people and never really fully formed a band or anything like that, but played in talent shows and things like that, But then it came time to decide where to go to college. And my brother, 2 years older than me, had gone to California to go to USC Film School. And since I had been in Detroit my whole life, I'm like, I literally was like, I want to roll the dice and go somewhere I've never been and see that part of the world and see what it's about, So I honestly can't tell you why I chose Arizona. I think I just was like, oh, that looks cool. It's right next to where Doug is. And so I applied to Arizona State. And I had also already been accepted to Michigan State, which was like all the money was on going to Michigan State at the time because that was what I knew and where I was from and stuff. But I had a courageous buddy of mine back in that Detroit area. And he said, let's go to Arizona and see what it's about. So that's how I ended up initially in Tempe, Arizona, was as a freshman college student at Arizona State. And so I went through the typical, first couple of years of college trying to being pretty lost, basically. But Arizona, Tempe had such a, at that time, thriving nightlife. I found myself being kind of drawn to that. And, I had a handful of guitar skills in my back pocket when I arrived in Arizona. And I'm like, man, it would be so cool just to play on one of these be down here playing with a band on any one of these stages down on Mill Avenue. I remember Walt Richardson and Morning Star, like that band just blew my mind. And I spent a lot of time in that area. I didn't have a band going yet or anything like that. But slowly as time kept going, and I got exposed to more of the bands that were around, Gin Blossoms, and all the bands that were popular, down there on Mill, Soul Mines, and, the Mortals, I loved the Mortals. I used to go see them. Me and the bartender used to watch them on Tuesday nights at Edsel's Attic. We were like the only people there, but I'm like, this band is great, Anyway, so that's how I ended up in the Tempe sort of music scene mix. My first attempt at a band was while I was still attending Arizona State, and I got together with 5 guys that I knew from sort of the Greek circle there. You know what I mean? They threw all the big parties, the fraternities and sororities. So I got together with a great friend of mine named Bud Cole, and I still regularly speak to him. He's an awesome guy and a really good musician. And Matt Engstrom, Mike Gatt, Brian Spector on bass, and we formed a cover band called Ritual. And Ritual, I made more money playing in Ritual than I ever have since. We played all the time, and of course it was just a cover band, and we weren't the shit. We were a good band, but we were young. We were just young guys. But we played all the time for all the fraternity parties, for the sorority formals. In fact, one of my career highlights, we were playing a formal dance at the Point at South Mountain. Right. And REM happened to be touring, and they were staying at the Point, right? So Ritual's there playing a sorority dance, and who walks in the back room but Peter Buck and Peter Halsipel, who is their sort of utility guy. Next thing you know, we've got Peter Buck and Peter Halsipel up on stage with us, and we're doing Superman with them. Right. It was crazy. It was like sort of those, I can't believe this is happening, but it kind of feels like this is meant to be. Like this is where I'm supposed to be. Ritual ultimately sort of fizzled as people were finishing college and moving on in their adult lives. Of course, I this was the only thing I ever really wanted to do. So we sort of morphed into an original band called August Red. And August Red was all original. Tim Teal was the singer. Again, the bass player and other guitar player and drummer were still from Ritual. But anyway, we started playing around, and we had some pretty good success. We played as an original band for 2 or 3 years, doing the local circuit. And ultimately, whether it was, egos or just, being in a band with people for a while, it started to get strained. And I was terrified because I'm like, if this band breaks up, man, I've got so much invested in living this life. I don't know what I'm going to do. But when the band broke up, I was really terrified because I didn't know what I was going to do, but I wasn't ready to give up. Enter. Well, actually, I should preface this with PH Naffah was also playing that same circuit with a band called Rain Convention, and Bud Cole was the singer of Rain Convention. So I met PH in the scene, playing gigs at the different clubs. We would cross paths and stuff, and we were friends, friendly acquaintances at first. But he lived near where I lived, and we went to a lot of the same sort of functions at that time and stuff. So we kind of got to be buddies, for friends. And so I knew him previous to meeting Roger. But so how it happened that am I going too far with all of this? Am I jumping your questions?
Oh, not at all. No, no, we're just rapping here. This is how it
Okay.
goes sometimes.
Okay.
I do have to say, I'm like making notes, and
Okay.
my
Sure.
notes say Motley Crue, Mortal,
Yes.
and Peter Buck. So first of all, Motley Crue, Too Fast for Love was a very important record for me, and
Absolutely.
I think you and I from the beginning kind of bonded over this really wonderfully tacky heavy metal music that we loved dearly,
Yes.
anything you love dearly when you're 14, you love it dearly for your whole life on some level. And
Absolutely.
that record, Too Fast for Love, I don't know what it was about that record, but it was kind of an independently released record, before Shout at the Devil, before they became, what everybody knows of Motley Crue. And that album is so great. Um, for
I'm
it's
alive, alive wire. I mean, I still hear it in my head, man. It blew my mind. You know what I
yeah,
mean? It blew my sixth grade mind, and I just I didn't know yet at that point that was the kind of genesis of me following music. But you're right. When you and I first got together, I remember you having this sort of encyclopedic knowledge of the metal players, and especially in particular the bass players. And I'd try to stump you when we were on the road. Remember, I'd ask you, okay, who's the bass player for Crocus? You know what I mean, or and one of these bands, and you would know.
yeah. I mean, I like prided myself on it. I believe like eventually most of it has been kicked out of my head, but definitely
Yeah,
the Crocus
right.
guy. I was probably the
You,
last guy to remember him, and he's probably like, "Come on, Art, hang in
yeah.
there with me." But I have to this if there's like one, if I were writing the Brian Blush biopic,
Uh huh.
like the equivalent of the one that's out about Elvis now, or the Ray
Yeah.
Charles one, or any of that, I think of like this is a story that I have in my head.
Right.
It's 1985. Brian Blush is driving his car down the road, and the new song by Night Ranger comes on, which is called "Rockin' America."
This is a true story. How do you know this? Did I tell you this?
Yes, you told me this.
Yeah.
And Brian, this was the way Brian described what happened that day. He said, "I had to pull over because I was rocking too hard." And I was like, I know this man. This man sees me and I see him. So, but yeah, so I mean,
Great, man.
I was a big Night Ranger guy. I loved Dawn
Yeah.
Patrol. Then when the Midnight Madness came out, I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this Rockin' America, this is the greatest thing that ever happened. So anyway, that's you and I can always go back to that, and we were roommates
Yes.
in the Refreshments, so we could always go back to that 14, 16-year-old heavy metal stuff, and
Absolutely.
have
Yeah.
a place to bond. So
Right.
um, but so you're in Tempe, you're in a band called August Red, and just to clarify, August Red was the most jealousy-inducing band in Tempe, because
Widely
August
hated. Widely
because
hated by the local scene.
yeah,
I mean, I don't know about hated, but certainly envied. I guess like we got all the high paying gigs, and we're playing on all the big stages, and um, a lot of people were not thrilled about that.
right, because they're 20 something guys, and they all want to be on that stage on Friday night,
Right.
and I was one of those guys, and
Right.
um and so you know so you're in August Red. August Red breaks up, and I want to say right about that time, I was probably meeting up with Roger and Dusty.
Right.
Dusty and I were in a band called the Hanson Brothers. This is the Post Mortals band.
Right.
And Jim Gerke was the lead singer of the Hanson Brothers. So we were a trio. We didn't take anything seriously. You know, maybe we'd play a gig, maybe we wouldn't. Maybe we'd write a song, maybe we wouldn't. Maybe we'd just play Night Ranger songs, you know, one night.
Yeah.
Maybe X, Y, or Z wouldn't show up and it would just be two of us jamming. You know how it goes. Um,
Absolutely.
so, but you know, one day, you know, Dusty was like, "Well, you know, this, you know, the lead singer of the Mortals, Roger, he's back from Taipei, Taiwan. You know, do we?" We just weren't sure. And Dusty was always about jamming. Dusty was always about he's not worried about a month from now getting a gig or 6 months from now, you
Right.
know, being able to pay his rent. Dusty was just like, "Can we jam tonight?" You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and so
Still very much the same, by the way.
right,
Still
exactly.
very much of that mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you know, you know, from this distance, I really respect it. He just wants to play
Yeah.
right now. And what more do we have than this moment? You know, and that's
Yeah.
kind of Dusty as a musician. You know,
Yep.
and so and so it came through the wire that Brian Blush, the guy in August Red, you know, was available and was, you know, looking for some, you know, a band to be in. And so we were like, and Roger and I, we were, you know, way out in left field a lot. Like our Night Ranger, Rogers and my Night Ranger was Camper Van Beethoven. That was the band that like we could sit around and talk for an hour after practice about Camper Van Beethoven.
Yeah.
And so we were like, you know, violin player, you know, we're gonna go that route. But it's like, well, you can't be just like Camper Van Beethoven. You
Right.
can't,
Right.
you know. So it's like, well, let's have this. Brian Blush wants to come in and try this out. You know, let's see what happens, and maybe we can turn it up a notch. So, tell us about that experience from your perspective.
Okay. Let me preface this with one short story on how I met Raj and got invited to come jam with you guys. Um, I was married at the time, and my wife and I had a house in Tempe, and we threw a party one night, and you know, a lot of the usual suspects were lurking about. You know, Hopkins was there, and G. Brian Scott, and Philip Rhodes, and those kind of guys. But Roger Clyne was there, and I had seen the Mortals a bunch of times. I was a fan of the Mortals. You know, I hadn't seen the Hanson brothers, but I thought that what Roger was doing with Dusty on those Tuesday nights, I'm like, man, if I could jump in that band, because I could hear I could hear myself playing parts in the songs that he was singing. So when this opportunity came up, Raj and I got to talking at this party, and I said, and there was a couple guitars laying around, and he was like, "Why don't we here pick up a guitar? I'll pick up a guitar. Let's see if we can make it through Kiss Off by the Violent Femmes." And I was like, okay, you know, I don't think I maybe even had heard the song at that point, but we just started jamming on it, and we got done. He's like, I'll tell you what, man, I've got this thing going with Art Edwards, buddy. I knew you as at the time, and Dusty. And I'm like, man, if it's anything like the Mortals were, I'm in. I always saw that as my destination, as a band like that with these really great, you know, thematic story songs, and sort of like, you know, it grew more cinematic as we went along. But so anyway, Raj invited me to come down and jam in Dusty's basement with you and Bud and Raj. So here I've been playing in this, you know, pseudo kind of alt rock band on big stages all over Tempe. So I've got the gear that I have at the time matched uh, that that setup. I had this huge 412 Mesa Boogie cab with this rack mount, all this. It looked like NORAD, you know. And at my feet, I had like this missile launcher pedal system, you know, like. And I remember you guys looking at me. Just I could kind of feel like a sort of. I could feel some. some looks coming off like, oh, this guy won't, this is not the way we want to go. You know what I mean? I could feel it, but I knew that all this stuff the gear was a product of the gig that I was doing. And I knew that I could, I could wow you guys if I just, if I just kept my head in the game and had some fun with it. That was my main manifesto at that time, was just, straight out of Spinal Tap, have a good time all of the time. And the songs were so fun. I jumped into a song you wrote. It was the very first song we ever played together as the Refreshments, those four musicians, was Carefree. Mm-hmm. And you guys started going around on the, the A, E, B, D, whatever the riff, the chord progression. And I literally didn't think about it. I just started in with that riff, that and it was, I know I haven't had an experience like that since, where I was so in that moment, and it just clicked for me. It was like this lightning in a bottle, and I just prayed that you guys were hearing what I was hearing, because I loved it. I was instantly hooked.
Yeah, so. Yeah, that's pretty much how I remember it too. It's like, two guys. We were from a certain side of the tracks, and you were from another side of the track of Tempe, and you were coming down in there, and all of the norms and the protocols and everything were a little different. There were different amps, there were different pedal boards,
right?
And maybe some questions were flying through people's heads about, is this really where we're heading? Is this really going to be right for everybody in the room?
Right.
And then the first note, going through the head of Carefree. Up to the vocal. By the time Roger sang the first words, I knew you were the guy.
Well,
it was that obvious, and I have to ask a question about that.
Sure.
And here's the question: I'm not saying I saw August Red 1,000 times, but I definitely saw August Red. When I hear that lick, was that a style that you had consciously changed from the time you were in August Red, or were you playing like that in August Red? Because honestly, I felt like that's not a style I associated with you at all. This sort of club blue, pop blues kind of style, bendy notes, right, and that kind of thing. So what do you think?
It was definitely not really the flavor of August Red at all. I don't know how to really explain the sound of August Red, other than it was like one of those more kind of I don't want to say self-important, but like a band that took themselves too seriously. So everything had to be, it was, I'm trying to think of a band to compare it to, like, I don't know. But anyway, yes and no. Okay. To answer that question, I got to back up just a little bit. The time that I had spent down on Mill Avenue, even when I was playing in August Red and having success and money and stuff with being a musician, whenever I would hear a band like the Mortals or Soul Mines, I'm like, man, I want to be there. I want to live on that side of the tracks, not where I'm at. You know what I mean? That's where my heart is. You know what I mean? Like, that's the stuff that I love. And by that time, I was, friends with Doug Hopkins, and he was like my end all be all guitar idol. So a lot of what came out of me, I think, in those early days of the Refreshments was I wanted to play in a way that I thought he would dig. You know what I mean?
Right.
But at the same time, it wasn't just an attempt to try to please my idol. It was something that I felt, sincerely and honestly. And I just hadn't had the opportunity in August Red to play that way, because the songs were different. They were more like alternative hard rock kind of,
Right.
And less like Mill Avenue bands, you know what I mean? Like where melody and tambourines and jangling stuff. Like I love that. I love that sound, and I knew I could do well if I was just given a chance to bring my signature to that area. I knew also coming in that I had spent a lot of years in a band where we had two guitar players and we were always competing with each other for the lead or for the, I was sick of that. I didn't want to compete. I wanted to play the way I felt when I felt it. And so when I met you guys, I told myself consciously, I said, don't overplay. Like when the singer's singing back, back down, and when there's a little spot for you to shine, step up and do it. And Hopkins had been trying to school me in this, the school of dynamics, like musical dynamics, which I had no clue about in the early bands that I was in. It was everybody was trying to turn up louder than the other guy so they could be heard, as opposed to backing out when it's someone else's turn to take the spot.
Right.
So that was something that I consciously brought with me to that rehearsal for sure.
I think that was really the key for me too. And from the Hansons to when I started playing with just Roger and Dusty, I don't know what happened, but there was, I don't know, you grow up with Rush, you grow up with Iron Maiden, you grow up with all these cats who are their bass line is really the focal point of the band in a way.
Right.
Um, and, and I always say drummers are always really self-conscious about whether they know anything about melody. Bass player is always really self-conscious of, can anybody even hear what I'm doing? Like,
right.
do people even understand what I'm doing amongst the rest of the music? And so we get in this sort of mentality of, if you're playing a song in A, G, that goes from A to G to D, you've got to do this big walk in between all of the chord changes and make sure that everybody knows that you're a bass player and you've got these licks,
Yeah.
And for me, it was getting in the basement with Roger and Dusty, and there was no reason for it whatsoever. I just said, you know what? I'm going to find the kick drum, and I'm going to stay there. And when it's time to get away from the kick drum, I'll be the first one to know.
Yeah. Right.
And there's plenty of opportunities, and that way, when you do as a bass player, when it's as a guitar player, when you do, it stands out. It's like, oh wow, he's playing something. What's he doing?
Exactly.
So
I think about just for example, like a song like Mekong, like that song would not exist if it weren't for that bass line. That's just brilliant, but it's not overplayed. It's just a tasteful melody line that the bass happens to carry. And that stuff blows my mind. You've always been my favorite. I know you are a multi-instrumentalist, but I love the way you play bass because you can hold down the fort when everything needs to kind of back away and let the vocal do it. But when there's a little chance to sort of just do a tasteful little, walking between the notes or whatever, or do a, like that kind of the rock and roll stuff, you would do it. And I'm like, yes, I fucking love that, man. That's, that was, I remember leaving that rehearsal just, first of all, praying that you guys liked what I did, but like walking on air, I'm like, this is fucking amazing. I'm in. I want in on this.
Right on.
For sure.
And you sense that with bands and people who come and practice. Tim Anthony's and I went around, like we put ads in the New Times and stuff where people were just cats from anywhere would come over and like try out. And they can just be so far gone. And it's just not right. There's nothing wrong with them, nothing wrong with the way they sing, nothing wrong with who they are. They're just, wow, we just don't even speak the same language, really.
It didn't fit, right. It was just it was a square peg, like a lot of musicians would be square pegs. And I felt like, to me anyway, of course, I did feel that I was a little bit maybe, I don't want to say resented, but I could, like I said, I could kind of feel like, yes, what the fuck is Brian Blush doing down here in our base? And, I could feel that a little bit, but I knew once we started playing, I was like, man, these guys don't know who I am. Really. They just know me from that,
Right.
Let me put me in, coach. I know what to do,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, we, obviously, it took like 16 seconds of music for everybody to go, okay, we're done.
Yeah.
Let's see how far this thing can take us. You know what I mean?
I remember we were all kind of like giggling at the end of the Carefree. We were like, and me probably more than you guys, but I was just like, this is going to be good.
Yeah.
And I remember, I don't mean any disrespect to the bands that I played in previous to the Refreshments, but I had always, after becoming, obviously the Gin Blossoms were the king of Mill Avenue, and they got the record deal and got out of town and had song on the radio and MTV, all of those things. But I wanted, the first time that I saw the Gin Blossoms play at the Sun Club, I'm like, this is a real band. This is what rock and roll really is. I'd been on this other wavelength about how, I was more worried about being famous and popular than I cared about the songs, really. I mean, when I saw the Gin Blossoms, like, that's real.
Right.
And I felt the same way after that first night at with the first tryout that I came to. I'm like, this is real. I mean, this is like a real rock band. The songs are fun and catchy, but also have a depth to them. And I don't know. I can't explain. It was an epiphany for me, for sure. Like that, I've found what I think I'm gonna do for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was the right mixture. And I think the Gin Blossoms, it's really important for people to understand, for guys like you and me who are playing in Tempe in the early 90s. Um, there was this and let's face it, you were a little ambitious. You wanted to succeed. You
Yeah,
wanted to be a musician. You wanted to pay your rent with your gig money. You
I
wanted
did.
to someday make a record for a record company, tour the country. We want to do all that,
Yeah,
and we had a shot at it. And we
yeah,
picked this. We both picked this town, Tempe, Arizona. There was no
yeah,
rock and roll reason to choose Tempe, Arizona. We just wound up there, and it turns out there was a real rock thing happening there.
yeah,
And
yeah. Our timing was impeccable because we
yeah,
arrived at that time when the door was opening on, light was being shined in this little corner of the country, in terms of like record companies looking at it and stuff. It was sort of the genesis of, when grunge kind of was having its waning moments. People were looking for something a little more upbeat and kind of fun, um, and I don't want to say jangly as opposed to heavy, but like, it wasn't as important that it had, those huge mushy guitars and all that kind of stuff. It was like, I remember for the first time buying an amp. I bought a Fender. It was a Super Reverb, a blackface Super Reverb, which I would have been laughed out of practice at with August Red. But I'm like, this is perfect for this band. It's like, it's almost clean, but if I hit the guitar hard enough, it can get a little bit of distortion. I never thought of playing that way in a band before, but it was like, it just made sense.
right.
A lot of those longings that I had to be in a band that I loved coalesced when the four of us came together. So
Yeah, and it was breaking, finding all the elements that broke us through the glass ceiling of the Gin Blossoms, of that level of, because there was no, we had no idea how to do it. It's like
right,
you would watch them and you're like,
yeah,
so what? I just drink a lot and
right,
and play like I don't care that it's, that if the wheels fall off in the middle of the song, I could care less.
right,
And you have to, it takes a lot of practice to care that little. You know what
right,
I mean? You're like, no, wait a second, we got to be careful that this thing is precious, and we have to make it's no, not at all. It's
right.
it's it's got to be ready to fall apart at any given second, and it might very well by the end of the night.
I think that's, the vibe was what was important as opposed to the perfection of it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I remember seeing like the Gin Blossoms play at Sun Club, where there's like, I think the place had a dirt floor, didn't it? I mean, there was like a wooden stage, and people would be dancing. There'd be like this cloud of dust kind of hovering in the crowd, and all those guys are smoking cigarettes on stage. It was like this rock and roll kind of machine, and a lot of that had to do with the live energy of it. But I think the lesson from that live energy and that sort of by the seat of our pants kind of approach really really carried the some of the lyrical ideas with it as well. These were all in our early 20s. Everybody's partying like there's no tomorrow. breaking, getting broken hearts for, for the first time, chasing girls and getting dumped and going drinking and running off to Mexico and that kind of stuff. It was all, we were kind of living that way. So to sonically be able to just kind of let go and just barrel sally forth into the void, if you
Sally
will.
forth into the void.
Um, that's what we did, and I loved it. I never felt more free. Of course, I wanted to play well. I didn't want to, be a mess and sloppy. Um, but I wanted this. The energy that I could really tell it works in my own mind before we ever played live. But when we played live that first time, people were dancing at our first gig. You remember
I do.
at Long Longs? We
Yeah,
opened for
let me clear.
Flathead, I think it was.
You're telling the story. I should have just let you
No,
go.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Basically, January 1994, first Refreshments show. Brian was just gotten the job booking at Gibson's, the new club, which used to be Chewy's. Brian's booking at Gibson's, and he came to band practice and said, because we weren't, I don't know, are we ready? Are we not sure we're ready or not? It's like we were way past ready. We were ready. And you showed up one day and said, well, I just have to say Flathead. It's Thursday night. Flathead's playing at Long Wong's. They need a leadoff act. He'd be really low key, but it's Long Wong's. It's a great place to start. So go ahead and say what you were going to say.
Yeah, so we did it, and we loaded in there at Long Longs, which was, in that scene that you guys were particularly more part of than I was, in August Red, that sort of other side of the tracks vibe. Long Longs was a coveted gig because it was such a cool joint. But if you had 40 people in there, you couldn't even move. You know how small that room was.
Yeah.
And cramming on that little tiny stage by that back window.
Yeah.
But it was like when that place was rocking, man, there was just nothing like that place. So yeah, we opened for Flathead, and I think had we decided at that point to hand out the water wings and onions and stuff yet?
We were trying to do something new every gig. The first one was Safety Orange. Everybody had to wear Safety Orange.
That's right.
Because we didn't want anything to go wrong.
That.
So I think maybe you had kind of a turtle, or you had like a Safety Orange turtleneck on, which was probably the only time in your life that you ever had something like that on.
Yeah, I may bring that look back in. I don't know. For the latter half of my time on the planet, it's a good look.
Yeah. So we played Long Wong's January 1994, and I think one of my most memorable gigs was playing Long Wong's later, and not much later. A month or two later, and the PA was going out, and we were playing Sucker Punch, and Long Wong's, it's a kind of a thrown together PA system. It's not necessarily
that little powered 4-channel head in the corner that we had to do ourselves. Yeah, I think you were actually running the sound, weren't you? Like you had to turn the dials.
Yeah, it was pretty much dialed. There it is. There's the sound. That's it.
Right.
Just play, and
one vocal mic and one vocal mic pretty much, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. And so the PA was cutting in and out. And it was Sucker Punch, and so we didn't have any singing, but we could still hear singing, and people were going, I was never cool enough to get a job at a record store. And we're on stage and we're like, holy shit, they know our songs. We didn't even have an album. The only way to know our songs was to come to our shows.
Yes. Yeah.
And
that's true.
And that PA flickered in and out. That was just, spine tingling, goosebump inducing, moment.
I do recall that happening a few times in our early days. That one was a gear malfunction that allowed us to hear that. But then Rod would kind of sometimes work it in where he would stop singing and let the crowd do it. And like you said, we hadn't even released Wheelie yet, and people, I don't even know how they knew I don't think I knew all the words to the songs, and they're right. Singing along every line.
Yeah.
Yeah. What can you say? That's like, that's a special kind of feeling when you're a musician to hear that. So
Yeah, just a
a lot of fun.
just a gift. Thank goodness something goes
Yeah.
right every once in a while, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so probably around summer of '94, we got it in our heads to make a record. We were going to make a local record. We'd been playing, I don't know, we played maybe 2 3 times a week. We were practicing. We were always writing new songs. Roger would show up and would say something like, "Oh well, I have this song from like back in the Mortals days,"
Yeah.
and he'd play it, and Dusty's like, "Oh yeah, you mean Don't Want to Know?" And Roger's like, "Yeah," and he plays Don't Want to Know, and I'm like, my jaw is just dropping, and I'm like, "You had that just sitting around?"
Right.
You know what I mean? That's just, oh yeah,
Yeah.
you want a song? Oh yeah, I got these. I got like a bucket full over here. Just let me know how many you
Yeah.
want. I was like, I mean, they were that good, and we were
Yeah.
like, I remember like the solo for Don't Want to Know. The first time you played the solo for Don't Want to Know. It's like just kicked it to the next level. It was just exactly what the Mortals needed, you know. So
Thank
um,
you for saying that. I'll just interject really quickly here.
yeah,
Though I not in an egotistical way, but I always thought when I would see the Mortals, I'm like, they need me to wrap a nice little sonic bow on this song, and I was hearing it in my head as I'm watching them. So, thank you for saying that. But I felt that. I was kind of this. I was the shiny paint job on this. What underneath is this really cool car.
right on. Yeah, yeah.
So,
So so we got to immortalize this. It's like now we've got to do Dusted. The Gin Blossoms were the template. That's the way you do it. We felt like we broke through the glass ceiling. People were coming to our shows. We would expect 10 people and there would be 50, and we would expect
yeah,
70 and there would be 150, and it was that kind of thing where your expectations keep getting blown away.
yeah,
And so it's like, okay, the Blossoms did Dusted. Their local record was called Dusted. We need a local record. And so
really,
we wind up at Salt Mine Studios
yep.
after. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I had known Don Salter. I think I did a demo there of a song that I had written at Salt Mine, and I knew those guys, and the price was right. So we
Mm-hmm.
decided let's go here and make a demo. Like you said, I don't think we had much in mind other than like let's just go in and record this batch of what I think it was 12 songs, 12, 11, 12 songs, something like that. And yeah, so Salt Mine was this little. It was in a strip, like a end of a strip mall, or no, like a little industrial complex. It was way back in the corner,
Yeah.
and I remember we'd be there late at night. I
Yeah.
remember also. I remember drinking enough beer that we started on the first day of recording, taking beer cans and stacking them on the ledge of the window between the control room and the main room.
Yeah.
And by the time we had finished like we had basically blocked out that window with beer cans.
Right, right. So
I do remember that.
The engineer Mark Matson couldn't see us anymore,
Yeah,
but
exactly. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I
Mark was great though, and Don Salter, he's still here in the valley. He's still got Salt Mine going. And but yeah, go ahead. You continue.
no,
I'll pepper it with thoughts if any come to me here.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I have to just clarify why we were recording so late at night, because we were Don's quite the negotiator, but he also really really wanted us in the Don was one
He
of the
did.
very early people who said, "You guys are something special, and I want to be part of it." Um, come in and record in my studio. But he still, he wasn't going to give anything away. He's a businessman. He had to take care of business. So we were negotiating for a while, and it eventually came out that if we recorded after the real recording session of the day was over,
Yeah.
we could get it at a discounted rate or for next to nothing or whatever. And we're like, oh, that's us, man. That's no problem.
Yeah.
So, if a recording session would go to 10:30, then we would show up at midnight. And
Right.
and
Yeah.
of course, if we're there at midnight, there's only that one direction that's going. So, um,
Yeah. In those
and
days, for sure.
and it wasn't, I don't think we were there more than 5 or 6 times total. We went there, we knocked them out, we mixed it.
I think.
Um,
Yeah. I think it was about a week that we spent there.
yeah,
Maybe like 4 days split up by two that we weren't there. You know what I mean? Like,
right,
it wasn't a long time at all. That's for sure. It was.
yeah,
It was within the time frame of less than a week, I would think, that we were actually recording.
yeah. But I always really loved Wheelie. I always loved that we captured that aspect of the band at that time. I mean,
Yeah.
as special as the band was for both of us as we moved, as we sallied forth into our into our careers together.
Yeah.
Um, that 1994, that was really, when everything changed, for all of
Yeah.
us. How do you
It
do
is.
this? How do you become the Gin Blossoms? How do you become Dead Hot Workshop? And then all of a sudden we had something that resembled that and could be talked about in the same sentence with those great bands that we all loved. Um, uh, so we got that. We released it by the end of the year, December. It was at the Yucca Tap Room, and it was December 4th. I said it's either going to be out December 4th or December 11th. I was the administrator. I was the guy who would
Yeah.
interface with
Take
the
care of the business
CD
aspect. Yeah.
company and all that stuff. And
Right.
they sent me the boxes. I had 1,000 wheelies in a cylindrical tube like this, and then I had 10 boxes of plastic, and because
Had
they
to
were
put
like,
them together.
right, they were
Had to put
like,
them all together.
it's another $1,000 for them to put it together. It's like, no, we're doing that. We're gonna keep that grand. So
Yeah.
we sat there and put them together, and I said it's going to be December 4th or December 11th. And on December 4th, I walked into the Yucca with the box on my shoulder of 200 CDs, and there we had a booth reserved all the way in the back of the Yucca for the merch table. We never had a merch table.
Right. Yeah.
We,
It was
we
just a
just
booth. Yeah. At the
Yeah.
Yucca. I think.
So
Yeah.
so we're like, we need to reserve that booth. So we reserved it. I walked in with the box, and there were maybe 70 people there when I walked in, and I felt 140 eyeballs watch me as I
Yeah.
walked through the room and walked. And by the time I sat down, there was a line
Yeah.
coming from that booth, and the first guy walked up. He dropped a lot of cash on the table and said, "Give me 15."
That's great. I never heard that story. That's funny.
Dude, if I don't think there's any more success at any point in the refreshments than somebody throwing money on the table. The first guy,
But yeah.
and give me 15.
Give me 15. I love that. I
I
never
wonder
heard that story. I love that.
I wonder if he still has them. But anyway, so that's Wheelie. That's 1994.
Yeah.
Brian Blush, Dusty Denham, Roger Clyne, and me, little old me, playing in a band in Tempe and making our living, paying our rent with cash that we were playing at, making it gigs. Great time. So the calendar switches to 1995, and we are now getting serious about, okay, now we've got a CD, we've got things we can send to like South by Southwest, we got things we can send to important people in Los Angeles and all that stuff. So we start sending out the CDs. Do you remember, kind of around that time what you were thinking, where you were at, or?
Um, I was, generally I was euphoric with the success of the band because I had wanted that kind of, I had played in front of a lot of people and been on a lot of big stages, but never had the genuine, like, heartfelt love of a crowd that was like, we want these songs. You know what I mean? I was in bands that sounded great live, and you could go see and have a night and then just go home and not think too much about the songs, but like people wanted to hear what we were doing. And so I think what we, at that point, we decided, in my recollection, is that we decided that we should do this, take the steps. We did kind of follow the Gin Blossoms footprint because they had gotten signed out of South by Southwest in Austin. And you have to apply to that and get accepted to it in order to even be invited to play. So, we sent, well, look, what do we got to lose? Let's send this in. I think the New Times even endorsed us or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but we got invited to come play at South by Southwest,
Mm-hmm.
which was like, at that time, was like the next stepping stone, to be able to play in front of A&R people, record companies. So that's what we did. We went
Yeah.
off to Austin, Texas.
Yeah, and Ruth Richards was the person. She was in the room when they were listening to CDs at South by Southwest.
Right.
She was with Mercury Records, and she was in the room when they played it, and she called the president of A&R, the new president of
Yeah.
A&R, Peter Lubin at Mercury, and said, "Sign the Refreshments, just do it." Um,
Yeah.
she called it a no-brainer. Just do it.
Yeah.
Just listen to me. And so Peter Lubin's like, well, okay, well, I guess I'm going to Austin, Texas to see this band, The Refreshments.
Yeah.
Um, so he was there in the crowd that night when we played Austin, and we played a really good show, like one of my favorite shows, very
That was
memorable.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, we walked into the Steamboat where we were playing that night, and the band that was going to go on after us was on stage sound checking when we walked in, and it was a guy, and he clearly had a bass that was like too small, and there was another guy who kind of looked like him, and his guitar like didn't have enough strings on it, and
Yeah.
they
Like
played
3 strings.
yeah, and they played a song about a boll weevil, and it had a bass solo,
Right.
and so like I'm like, okay, we just and we just went to another planet. I don't, these guys were that good, So um, we
Sorry, I'm grabbing a pillow for my butt here.
it's okay, it's no problem. So yes, anyway, that was the presidents of the United States of America, and they played there, and they got signed the same day that we did out of the Steamboat. So
They did. Yeah. I remember the same thing, being in the Steamboat that night, walking in, and we actually had to follow those guys. They played before us, and I remember there was like the Steamboat was just this little club, kind of like similar to what we had been used to playing. I mean, it was there probably a few hundred people could fit in there, but there was like a little area behind the stage that they had sort of built for a load in, load out green room, if you will. And I was sitting back there, and I was looking I had a view of the people coming through the door of the club, and I saw the guy from Rolling Stone, that the guy with the big hair, Fricky, I think his name is,
oh wow,
David Fricky.
yeah,
And he walked into the show, and I'm like, I knew of him from, at that time MTV had that, MTV News or whatever, so he would be one of the regular contributors to that. So I knew what the guy looked like. I'm like, holy shit, the writer from one of the main writers from Rolling Stone is going to see our set.
yeah,
Crazy,
yeah. So
crazy.
so things is changing, no doubt about
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Um, and then we went to so we signed a record deal. Peter Lubin said we had the charisma of a burning building,
that's right.
and we signed a record deal with with Mercury. There was a lineup change that I don't know how much we want to talk about so much, but in a heartbreaking way,
Yeah,
we
definitely
felt
heartbreaking.
yeah
But
we
yeah, I mean, Dusty was such a big part of the early part of the band, but we had to make decisions about our career, and that's just the way that went. I still love Dusty. I still play with Dusty. So
Yep. To be clear, Brian's in a band called Murphy's Outlaw with Dusty Denham, the original drummer of the Refreshments. So,
yeah,
water under the bridge at this point. But it was Dusty was such a big part. The sense of humor
yeah,
came through in the music. We all love Dusty, but it was a time where it seemed like we were switching from becoming this thing that emerged from the swamp out of nothing, and we were turning it into a machine to take
right.
it out into the world, and we
We
knew
were
it
we
had
were going from being a really great bar band to becoming recording artists. I mean, that's kind of the way I feel about it. You
sure,
know.
sure.
Sorry, I'm swatting at gnats here. I don't know how they got in my house. These little black flies that drive me crazy. Anyway, go
So
ahead.
anyway,
Sorry,
so
you're off
we
track.
so now all of a sudden we've got a record deal and we don't have a drummer, and we also don't have a practice room. So we're basically flop housing, squatting at various stages around town to have practices like
Yeah.
Gibson's, and we need a drummer. So what do we do, Brian?
Uh, this goes back to having played, excuse me, in the early days on Mill Avenue when I became friends with Bud Cole, and he had started a new band with a guy named PH Naffah, who was this monster drummer. I mean, like he was. I mean, he was John Bonham at age 22. I mean, he was just this incredible force on the drums, and he was also very, very precise. He was technically maybe the best player I've ever played with. He would always. I had jammed with him a few nights, late nights over at Argo because they had a Rain Convention had a practice space over there, and August Red did as well as did the Refreshments at some point. But I had jammed with him a few times with him and some of his buddies, Nick Scropos and those guys. And PH, every song he had a metronome next to his drum set, and he had a earpiece in, and he would set the tempo to the song. I had never done that. I was kind of opposed to it, but what it did was PH was just so dead on. His meter was so perfect. So I'm like, I know this guy. I know a drummer that I consider to be maybe the best technical drummer I've ever seen. I mean, maybe ever seen play. And what would you guys think about me, asking him to come try out? And we, like you said, we didn't have a practice space at that point. So I was still, friends with the owner of Gibson's, and they allowed us to use the stage there as a kind of a practice space. So PH got PH to come down there, and I don't know did we give him anything to study on before we? I don't know if we even played him any songs beforehand or not.
No, I'll tell you what happened there. PH had a girlfriend at the time, Janine, who's now Janine Naffah, who's his wife, and he lived with his girlfriend and his sister, and
Yeah.
their favorite band was the Refreshments. And so we were this annoying presence in his life. We were pretty much August Red in his life. You know what I mean? He's
That's
like,
right. Yeah.
listen, do we have to listen to the Refreshments album again? So
Yeah.
the instant he got the invite to come over, this is entirely speculative. I don't know this to be true, but I think there was a moment where PH had to go out into the forest and come back and go, okay, I will play with it. You know what I mean? I got to get past that.
Right. Right.
And because we asked him, and I think there was probably 2 or 3 days where he wasn't, we weren't hearing from him, and we're like, I don't know how to, does he understand what we're asking him? We have a record deal. It's over.
Right.
All he's got to do is show up, and, and then I eventually got a phone call from him and said, dude, it's going to rock. And I was like, okay, all right, good.
Yeah. I know he had a lot of, because he had spent so much time, Nick Scropos was his best friend, and they had been a rhythm section together their whole lives, go all the way back to Chicago. So I knew when I asked PH if he wanted to try out for the Refreshments, it was touchy because I didn't want to try to come across as like I'm breaking up this partnership that he had with his, best friend for years and years and years. But I did explain that to him. I'm like, look, dude, I know that this is going to be maybe a difficult transition for you, but we have a record deal. You're going to be walking into a signed band, and I think that's really when he came over to because he was his family is professionals, and PH is a really intelligent guy, and it was important to him to have some sort of something that signified that we're doing this for real. It wasn't just, oh yeah, PH is in a band. That's good. He'll be a doctor later, when he finishes around. But when we had that backing of an actual, multi-million-dollar entertainment company asking us to come on board, I think that's what really, and we were friends too. So that was, it was great. I mean, he came in and just absolutely crushed it.
Yeah.
I remember you particular after that first time we played on the stage there at Gibson's. We were walking behind that little courtyard in the back there that had that roundabout kind of little area.
Yep.
And we're like, I can't believe he locks in the kick drum. Like I was like, I could play with his kick drum. You're like, because Dusty's lovable, but he's a lot of times by the seat of his pants.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for you that could be challenging.
Right. Sure. I mean, it was it was so shocking because the first song he wanted to play was European Swallow, and he completely attacked it, and
Yeah.
I felt like he was the whole show. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
He's so attacked it in a way with the kick especially, and it was, again it was just like duh, this is
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
Um,
I that's what I figured from the first time you guys would hear him, because like I said, I had jammed with him a few late drunken nights at Argo, but I knew how precise. Technically, he was just the best drummer I had ever played with by far.
yeah,
Dusty's great, and Dusty's got a lot of attitude and fun and charisma about his playing, but PH is just a machine. You know
mhm,
what I mean? He's just a, such a strong presence in that background, and you need that for if you're gonna really drive a song home. That's an important characteristic, is to have that, the rhythm section really locked in, and you guys locked in like we had never locked in before. I don't think we had a lot of good nights and a lot of fun nights, but I remember standing on the stage at Gibson's going, wow,
yeah.
this is badass.
So there we are. We're a foursome. We got a record deal. We go and make a record at Ocean Way Studios in L.A. And since then I play with Brett Hartley in Atlanta all the time. We make records together. And at one point, I casually mentioned that we played at Ocean Way, and his jaw just dropped. It's like, you guys recorded at Ocean Way Studios? You know, it was a real. It was a real. I think Green Day was recording up the road in another studio at the complex where they were making
Yep. Green Day
the
was in the back room. Yep.
yeah, they were making the follow up to Dookie.
Yep.
Brian Setzer had just left. Tony Bennett was coming in, and so it was we were dancing with the stars is probably
Yeah. Yeah. I
apt way.
remember walking into that main room where, the main recording room there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was bigger than the gymnasium of my high school. I mean, it was this gigantic room. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
We had a ping pong table set up in there, but there was still, like, you could still have a half court basketball game past the ping pong. I mean, it was huge.
Yeah, yeah,
And, but it was, I mean, it was just, it felt like it was kind of meant to be, because everything on that point had been on that upward tack, and I just remember it being a lot of fun, and I was just in love with that whole process. I loved being in the studio, and Cliff Norrell, who engineered and mixed. I guess you could say produced Fizzy Fuzzy.
definitely.
He was a really centering kind of presence, because he was this sort of Zen surfer dude from LA, but he had seen us play live, and part of what he wanted to capture was some of that energy that we generated on stage. So he approached it in such a way that I think it made us all feel comfortable.
Yeah,
I think he kind of got what we were doing.
yeah. He was the perfect kind of big brother.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Definitely very affable, a lot of fun to be around, a lot of fun to
Yeah.
talk to, great guy to be around, but at the same time, no, we're not doing it that way, we're doing it this way.
Right.
Getting the kids in line a little bit, and could play that
Yeah.
role for us, which
Right.
we needed. We were we were all
Yeah.
over the place.
Yeah. He was the chief cat herder at that
Chief
point,
cat
and
herder. Exactly.
but again, the thing that I respect so much about Cliff is that um, he would, before we ever went in to record, he flew out to Tempe and came to see us play. So he came to rehearsals,
Hmm.
and then he came to some gigs,
Yep.
and he got an idea of in his head about what was not just that the songs were cool and you know fun to listen to, but he got kind of the energy that we emitted off the stage, and I think he tried to capture some of that as well. He had a good understanding of at least the band we were at that time.
Sure. Sure.
So,
So we make Fizzy, and there was one. at that point, we're pretty much hit the road for about 100 years.
Yeah.
Um, I
Get in
remember
the van.
there was there, get in the van. We had a tour of the West Coast before the record came out, and I think that was more or less okay. You guys need to learn how the life that you've chosen here. You need to learn
Right.
how it goes, and hopefully it goes better than this. But you're going to start. We were lucky. We had a record deal, meant we could buy a used van, and we could use that's it was tremendous compared to most
Yeah.
vans. But at the same time, for us, we were comfortable enough, in our apartments in Tempe, and so we had to hit the road and sleep overnight sometimes in the van as you're driving and all that. And
I
um,
remember this kind of goes back to the Tempe element of the band, but we in a way we were really lucky to have kind of big brother characters in this scene in the Gin Blossoms and in Dead Hot Workshop, because they asked us to come on that tour
right.
as the opening band
Hmm.
up the West Coast. And I don't think that was our first time out, but that was that was one of those things where we're not just playing barrooms. It was kind of a college tour. We were playing these big, the event centers and stuff like that along the way.
Right.
And it was all of us from Tempe, so it was like this big traveling circus of these maniacs from Tempe out, making this southwestern kind of rock.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And we did that was the first tour was we basically went up to Seattle and back in a van, and this tour was we're so lucky. I imagine it was Robin Wilson of the Blossoms, was just like, well, they're the new Tempe thing. We'd love to have them out and to lead off for us. And it was what a gift.
yeah,
So we would
yeah,
go out and for our second tour, we were playing for 1,000 people or
yeah,
more.
or more.
And it's a half an hour before anybody, as people are coming in, putting their coats under their
Yeah,
seats and buying a beer and all that.
yeah,
But it was a real gift. So
yeah. People were paying attention to us too. I remember we would get done playing, and like you said, it wasn't, it was. I think we played maybe an hour before the Blossoms would come on. It would be us for 45 minutes, then Dead Hot for an hour, and then Gins for 90 minutes or whatever. But as people were coming into the arena and stuff, and there were already people there waiting, but they started getting into it. I remember people, like, noticeably people who had no idea who we were yet were digging it,
right.
and that was kind of fun. And that tour, I don't know if you had the volleyball team incident. You have that as part of your. That happened on the Gin Blossoms Dead Hot tour.
Right.
Did you
Okay.
have that in your notes to ask about?
No, but forget the notes. Brian, tell us the volleyball incident.
Okay, so at that time we were in a 15 passenger van with a trailer, and what we would do is maybe every third night or so we'd get one hotel room where everyone could take a shower. You had to use the phone. Remember, they know people. We had one cell phone strictly for emergencies, and that was the road manager's job. But we'd have to call home from the hotel rooms.
Yeah,
We'd have to call.
I had a phone card, but go ahead.
Yeah, phone card, exactly. Had to enter like 15 numbers.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so we stop at this. It was in Portland, Oregon, and it was this little. I think it was like a Motel 6 kind of place. But they gave us a room on the ground floor. And so I'm like, I need to get into the bathroom and shower. And I was just ready to have a plumbing. So I go in and I take a shower, and it's just me in the room by myself. And I'm loving it. I'm kicking back on the bed. And I'm like, maybe I'll call home. But first I wanted to, I had a towel wrapped around my waist. And the room was kind of dark because I hadn't turned on any lights, and it had those blackout curtains. So, and they have those sticks on the curtains so that you can open them like this. So I walk up to the window and I take one of those sticks in each hand, and I, like a conductor, I go whoosh, and my towel falls to the ground. So I'm standing there fully exposed, and there's a school bus outside of high school female volleyball players walking past my window. And I looked out and I just went whoosh, and closed it back up. But yeah, that was that's the, wow. That was a moment
Oh yeah,
for sure.
it was a potential life changing moment there.
It was. I mean, had it just happened, I would have been embarrassed had it just happened like to some couple in the parking lot. But there was literally 20, 15, 16-year-old female volleyball players getting off of this school bus and channeling right past me. And I don't think the towel didn't fall off immediately. I went like, whoosh, and then the towel dropped. And then I was stunned. I was like, I got hit by a deer light in the headlights, and I just looked and went, whoosh, and closed them back up. And I hid out, I think, for the rest of the day. I waited till they left the parking lot. I know that before I ever came back.
It's like that couldn't have gone any worse.
No, that hit every cylinder on the bad scale for sure.
So cool. So we're touring at this point. It's 1996. Fizzy Fuzzy comes out February 27th, 1996. We're on tour with the Blossoms, another gift from above. They allow us to go home, or they even might have set up the tour so that we got to go home for the release of the record and play the Yucca Tap Room. We actually played in the parking lot of the Yucca because it was a big record release party and it was too big of a deal to have in the club, because at the time the club was smaller than it is now. It used to be like 150 capacity,
Right.
150 or
Yeah,
something.
it was a little hole in the wall bar. I think that's something just to mention quickly. Back to the early success of the band. We would do Yucca for free on Sunday nights for people that wanted to come see us, and it became crazy really fast. But the Yucca had a lot to do with our popularity in Tempe on those Sunday nights. But anyway, back to I digress. Back to your
No, definitely our hometown club. It was before us. It was before us. The Yucca was 6 nights a week, one cover band. We started playing Sunday.
Nighthawk.
What are they called?
Nighthawk.
Nighthawk. That's right.
Remember Nighthawk?
Yeah. And I think, anyway, but so we played the Yucca and got back on the road, probably San Diego, for the next day to meet the Blossoms in San Diego, playing San Diego State, I'm guessing, and headed back up the West Coast. We played the Tacoma Dome. I remember we played some big event center in San Jose State.
I remember you fell in love with San Luis Obispo on that tour.
I did.
I remember we went to San Luis Obispo. We played. I'm not sure what is it. What's there? Santa Cruz.
Cal Poly.
Cal Poly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we played that. It was, I think, just like a big gymnasium. But I remember you walking around going, "This is so cool." You really love that town. I remember.
I did. I really did. I loved. The first time going around to every town in the country in 1996 was great.
That was cool. Yeah.
You'd go there and you'd go to the bookstore, you go to the record store. I mean, I would go to the bookstore and the record store, and
right.
But it was wonderful. And I remember waking up at the bus in Chicago and looking out the window, and literally Wrigley Field is right there. You've been sleeping all night, you wake up and there's Wrigley Field. By the way, I spent every childhood moment from 8 to 14 wishing I could be a Chicago Cubs. So
right.
And then the Cubs are playing that afternoon, so I buy a newspaper and go and stroll over and watch batting practice, and I'm reading the newspaper, and we're playing the Metro, which is
Cabaret Metro. Yeah.
And so all of those experiences are just I love that first time. Go ahead.
It was a remarkable way to be living life at that age, early 20s. Seeing a new city pretty much every day, and then going out and being adored, at night. It was dreamlike. I don't know how else to really put it. It was everything I had hoped for.
Right. Yeah. So we did that. I think we played. I've got the numbers written down somewhere. I think we played 250 times in 1996. I mean, literally 5 days a week for the entire year. Sometimes I remember one time we went to New York City, left New Jersey at night, played a gig in New Jersey, left New Jersey. I slept for an hour on the bus and we got to New York. They dropped us off at the hotel room. I slept for an hour in the hotel room. I got up, went to the Mercury offices, because every time we'd go through, we'd say hey to everybody.
Right.
Um, Left the Mercury office, came home and slept for an hour,
Yep.
and went to the sound check, slept for an hour, and played the gig. That was
Right.
kind of my life
Yeah.
during that period, in our
Yeah.
lives. That's how we were lucky by that point. We had a bus, which was Motley Crue's bus
That's
before we
true.
had it. So
From the Home Sweet Home video. Yeah.
so
That's the.
it all comes back to Motley Crue.
It does. It does. Because we're too fast for love, bud.
So anyway, yeah, that was very hectic, but everything that we wanted to go out and play. We wanted to see if we could take this thing from Tempe and take it into the world, and go forth and multiply and see what we had. See, we could be the Gin Blossoms, maybe. Who knows?